London, 1814, just as the cannons boomed in Hyde Park to mark the Allies' victory over Napoleon, and the bells of St. Paul's pealed wild with thunder. Lady Delphina Montgomery stood alone in the marble vestibule of St. James's Palace, her pale blue silk gown crumpled from travel and her gloves stained with soot from the carriage's broken lantern. Her father's signet ring, heavy and cold, weighed down her small fist, the last thing he had pressed into her palm before the crown took everything. The ornate double doors opened with a groan. Two halberdiers stepped aside, and a man in a charcoal waistcoat nodded for her to enter. She moved stiffly. Her boots were damp from stepping into a puddle outside, and her heart thudded like a war drum. She had come to beg no, demand what was rightfully hers. Her family's estate in Northumberland, seized under false accusations of treason after her father's sudden death. Inside the long chamber, Lord Wiltham, Master of the Treasury, sat beside the newly crowned Prince Regent, a man Delphina had known once as a boy at court. His eyes skimmed her once, then flicked away, disinterested. "My lady," Wiltham said, voice flat, "the crown's decision is final." "Then the crown is mistaken," Delphina replied, her voice sharper than she meant it to be. "My father died in service to His Majesty. He was no traitor." "Your father supported the Jacobite cause in secret," Wiltham said. "We have the letters." "Forged," she snapped. "He was framed." The Prince Regent shifted. "Lady Montgomery, your grief is understandable. But your father died under suspicion. The crown must protect itself." Delphina's chest burned. She knew the truth. Her father had been loyal, but someone wanted their land, wanted her quiet. She left the chamber without curtsying. Outside, the cold air slapped her cheeks. The gates of the palace loomed tall and black behind her, and the world she'd grown up in, the balls, the gardens, the soft laughter in drawing rooms, vanished like steam in winter. 3 days later, she stood in the forge behind the Royal Mews, the only place she hadn't thought to look until desperation drove her there. She had followed the whispers of a man who once helped her father repair a ceremonial sword gifted by the king himself. A man who, they said, knew the truth about the letters. The forge roared with heat. Sparks danced in the air like fireflies. Iron rang out with each hammer strike. She stepped carefully inside. "I'm looking for the royal blacksmith," she called. The man at the anvil turned. He was taller than she'd expected, young, broad-shouldered, and covered in soot. He wiped his brow with the back of his arm, revealing sharp cheekbones, dark eyes, and a quiet intelligence behind the sweat. "Iron Fen," he said simply. Delphina swallowed hard. His name sounded like something struck into steel. "I'm Lady Delphina Montgomery." His brow twitched. "I know who you are. Then you know what happened to my father." He set down his hammer. "I know he didn't forge those letters." The forge hissed as he dropped the iron into water. She stepped closer, skirts brushing ash. "Can you prove it?" Iron didn't answer right away. He walked to a small chest near the back, unlocked it, and pulled out a leather-bound ledger. "Your father paid me for a ceremonial blade. On the same day the crown claims he was in Edinburgh meeting Jacobite loyalists." He opened the book to a page marked with a pressed violet. Her father's signature, strong and proud, stood beside Iron's. "Why didn't you come forward?" she asked, voice tight. His jaw worked. "I tried. No one listens to a blacksmith." She reached out, touched the page. "They'll listen now." "They won't," he said, "unless we make them." Delphina looked up at him. His eyes didn't waver. They were the kind of eyes that had seen fire, not just from the forge. "How?" "There's a duel," he said. "At dawn. In Green Park. Lord Wiltham's son, he challenged me after I accused his father of forgery. I accepted." Her breath caught. "That's madness." "It's how things are settled," he said, "among men like him." "And if you lose?" "I won't." She stared at him. "Let me help you." He shook his head. "You're a lady of the court. You've already lost everything. Then I've got nothing to lose." A long pause stretched between them. The forge crackled behind. He looked at her again, something softer flickering beneath the soot and stubbornness. "You'll need to dress as a servant if you want to be there," he said finally, "and come through the west gate before dawn." She nodded. That night, Delphina sat by the hearth in the tiny room Iron had offered her behind the forge. He had given her a wool blanket, a crust of bread, and a clean basin to wash in. She hadn't known such kindness in weeks. He passed by the door once, paused, then stepped inside. "You're not afraid?" he asked. I'm terrified, she said softly. But I'm more afraid of doing nothing. He nodded, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small object. A pendant her mother's. The one she'd lost the night her father died. I found it near the stables, he said. I meant to return it. She took it with trembling fingers. Thank you. For a moment, he didn't move. And then, slowly, he lifted her hand and pressed it to his chest right over his heart. A silence passed between them, deeper than words. I'll survive tomorrow, he said. Because I have to. For you. Delphina didn't speak. She only nodded, her hand still resting where he had placed it. The next morning, before the sun rose over Green Park, she stood beneath the trees in a stable boy's cloak. The grass was wet with dew. A ring of gentlemen, half drunk and half amused, gathered near the dueling grounds. Iron stood at one end, sleeves rolled, eyes focused. Lord Wiltham's son stood at the other, grinning like a fox. Delphina stayed hidden behind a tree, heart hammering. The pistols gleamed in the dim light. One shot rang out, then another. When the smoke cleared, Wiltham's son was on the ground, a bloody hole in his shoulder. Iron stood tall, unshaken. He walked straight toward her, ignoring the murmurs, the stares. You'll never be safe again, she whispered. I was never safe before, he said. And then, for the first time, he touched her face. Just once. The back of his hand against her cheek. It said everything he didn't. The crown had betrayed her. But love had found her in fire and ash. The damp scent of coal lingered in the folds of Delphina's cloak as she followed Iron through the narrow alley behind the mews. They moved quickly, sidestepping puddles and refuse, keeping to the shadows as the city stirred with the waking hour. The duel had drawn attention, but not yet consequence. That would come soon. Iron paused only when they reached the rear of a grocer's shop near Pimlico. Its shutters were still drawn, and the door unlatched with a quiet twist of a key from his pocket. Inside, the air was thick with dried thyme and barley sacks. He lit a lantern and guided her to a trapdoor beneath a stack of crates. She was my sister, he said, voice low, as he pulled it open. Worked here before she died. I kept the place in her name. Delphina stepped down into the cellar, where the stone walls held the night's chill. A cot rested in the corner beside a shelf of ledgers and a single cracked mirror. I didn't know you had family in London, she said. I don't anymore, he replied, closing the trapdoor behind them. She was 22. Fever took her last spring. Delphina sat on the edge of the cot, fingers brushing the worn quilt. I'm sorry. Iron hung his coat on a nail and knelt beside a locked chest. She saw things I didn't. About Wiltham. About the way the estate papers were altered. I didn't believe her then. Her gaze flicked to the shelf. Is that why you kept her ledgers? He opened the chest and retrieved a bundle of parchment tied with twine. She copied receipts. Recorded who came and went. There's an entry for a courier who visited Wiltham's clerk the day before your father was accused. The same man who vanished 2 days later. Delphina leaned forward. You think he carried the forgeries? I think he was paid to disappear. She took the top sheet, reading the neat, angular script. If we can place him at the clerk's office with documents, we can reopen the council inquiry. Iron nodded. We'll need someone who can identify him. Delphina thought for a moment. There was a footman at the treasury. Tall, with a crooked tooth. He used to sneak sweets to the scullery maids. He might remember. I'll find him, Iron said. You stay here. It's safer. She stood. I didn't come this far to hide. You didn't spend your youth learning how to disappear in alleys and cellars, he said, not unkindly. Let me do this. She stepped closer until only a breath hung between them. And if they're already looking for you, then I'll move like someone with nothing left to lose. Her fingers brushed his sleeve. You're not alone anymore. He looked at her then fully, as if seeing her in the flickering lantern light for the first time. The soot was gone from his skin, and she saw the lines at the corners of his eyes, not from age, but from effort from the weight of quiet vigilance. I know, he said. The cellar clock ticked softly overhead. She didn't move as he left, closing the trapdoor behind him. That night, Delphina sat at the desk reading through each page of the ledger, tracing the curve of her father's name where it appeared in ink now faded to brown. She found an entry for a payment to a fencing master in Lambeth dated 2 days before the supposed meeting with Jacobites. He had been in London, living, working. She folded the page carefully and slipped it into her bodice. When Iron returned, it was just before dawn again. He was damp from the drizzle, his boots caked in street mud. I found the footman, he said. Name's Ellis. He remembered the courier. Said the man had a scar along his jaw, called him Mole. Mole, she repeated. That's what my father used to call a clerk who sniffed around the court records. He said he'd gone too quiet before the accusations began. Iron sat on the floor beside her, stretching his legs. Ellis agreed to testify. Quietly. He'll speak to the solicitor if we can arrange it. Delphina exhaled slowly. Then we're not far. He nodded. But Wiltham's already watching the docks. If we try to leave the city or speak publicly, then we'll speak privately, she said. To someone who can't be bought. Iron raised an eyebrow. You know someone? My aunt, she said. Lady Emmeline. She's a recluse now, but she was once close to the Queen. If I can reach her, she could bring this to the Prince Regent directly. You'd have to go to Surrey. I can ride. He looked at her again, longer this time. You'd do that for this? I'd do it for my father's name. And for you. He didn't speak. Instead, he reached into his satchel and pulled out a small piece of iron, shaped into the beginnings of a brooch. It was half-formed, but delicate, a curling vine around a hollow center. I started this for her, he said, nodding toward the cot. But it never felt finished. Delphina took it gently. May I wear it? He hesitated, then nodded. It'll bring luck. She fastened it to her cloak, the cool metal pressing lightly against her collarbone. Then I'll bring it back with proof. Iron stood, offering his hand. She took it, rising with him. Be careful, he said. If anything happens. It won't, she said. Because you'll be here when I return. For a moment, neither moved. And then, quietly, he bent and pressed his forehead to hers. It was not a kiss. It was something older, steadier, a promise drawn not from passion, but from trust. When she rode out of London at sunrise, the brooch gleamed softly against her chest, a mark not of mourning, but of what might still be made whole. The woods beyond Guildford were quiet save for the creak of Delphina's saddle and the steady crunch of her mare's hooves over frost-hardened earth. A damp wind tugged at her cloak, and the iron brooch at her throat felt heavier with each mile. She'd avoided the main roads, weaving instead through farmland and coppiced groves, her path marked only by the memory of journeys made years ago when she was a girl visiting her aunt's estate for Christmastide in happier days. By the time she reached the ivy-covered gate of Hathersedge Hall, her gloves were stiff with cold and her cheeks wind-burnt. A stable boy, no more than 12, peered out from the side garden, startled by her sudden arrival. She dismounted, her limbs aching. I've come to see Lady Emmeline, she said, stepping forward. The boy hesitated, then nodded. She don't see many folk these days, miss. She'll see me. She waited in the vestibule, standing before a carved oak screen she remembered from childhood, its latticework still smelling faintly of lemon oil. When the door at the far end opened, her aunt emerged slowly. Her once dark hair had silvered, and she walked with the aid of a carved cane. But her eyes were as sharp as ever. Delphina, she said, voice low but clear. You've grown into your mother's bones. I need your help. Lady Emmeline led her through a narrow corridor lined with faded tapestries. I suspected as much. You wouldn't come otherwise. They settled in a drawing room, whose wallpaper peeled at the corners. A fire burned low in the grate. Delphina removed her gloves and cloak, revealing the brooch. Her aunt's gaze lingered on it. Who made that? A blacksmith, she answered. One of integrity. Lady Emmeline folded her hands. Tell me what you've brought. Delphina retrieved the folded ledger page and placed it on the tea table. This entry proves a courier visited Wiltham's clerk the day before my father was accused. A witness remembers the man. If we bring this before someone trusted at court, someone who cannot be pressured, it could be enough to reopen the case. Her aunt reached for her spectacles, adjusted them, and read in silence. When she finished, she looked up. You always were stubborn, like your father, but he was right to trust you. You knew? Delphina asked. I suspected, but I had no proof and no allies. And I was tired. Lady Emmeline leaned back. But I still have one favor owed me. From the Duke of Sussex. He's not fond of Wiltham. Delphina nodded, her throat tight. Will he listen? If I write to him, he'll come. If he sees this, and hears the testimony of your witness, he'll push it forward. I'll need to return to London by dusk, Delphina said. He's waiting. Lady Emmeline gave her a long look. This blacksmith. He's more than a witness, isn't he? Delphina didn't answer immediately. She traced the carved edge of the table with one finger. He's the only one who never looked away. Her aunt smiled faintly. Then don't let the city take that from you. The letter was written and sealed before noon, and Delphina tucked it into her satchel beside the ledger page. She changed into a dry riding gown, accepted a flask of warm broth, and mounted again beneath a sky grown low and colorless. By the time she reached the city's southern edge, the lamps had begun to flicker behind leaded windows. The cellar beneath the grocer's shop was dark when she arrived, but the scent of iron and damp wool still clung to the air. She descended the ladder and found a candle burning low in a stub of wax. "I thought you'd be later," Iron said, emerging from the shadows near the cot. His shirt was damp, his sleeves rolled, and a shallow cut marked his forearm. "You're hurt." "Only a scratch. I had to move Ellis. Wiltham's men were near the mews." She crossed to him, unfastening her cloak. "Then we don't wait. My aunt's letter is ready. We bring it to the Duke now." He glanced at her satchel. "You got through." She remembered my father. "And she hasn't forgotten how to pull strings." He nodded slowly, then reached for her hand. "There's a coachmaster I trust near Clerkenwell. He keeps a pair of grays for quiet runs. We'll need to move before word spreads," she said. He didn't let go. "Delphina, if this works, and they clear his name, what then?" She looked at him fully. The light from the candle carved his features into something both fierce and tender. "I take back the estate," she said. "And I ask you to come with me." "You'd leave London?" "I'd leave this city behind and never look back." He was quiet for a long moment. Then, without ceremony, he leaned forward and kissed her. It was the first time their lips met, and it was neither hurried nor hesitant. It was the weight of everything unspoken, the nights in the forge, the ledger in her hands, the blood on his sleeve, and the vow in her chest. When they parted, she rested her forehead against his. "I meant it," she whispered. "So did I." Outside, the city stirred with the sounds of carts and cathedral bells. But below, in that cellar of stone and soot, something unshakable had been forged between them, not in fire, but in faith. The coach arrived just past midnight, its lanterns dimmed and the curtains drawn. Iron held the door open for Delphina as she climbed in beside him, the letter to the Duke pressed firm against her ribs beneath her cloak. The chestnut horses were restless, their hooves clattering over uneven cobbles as the driver urged them toward the northern quarter. Neither spoke until the city's tighter alleys had given way to the wider, quieter lanes near Bloomsbury. "You've done this before," Delphina said, watching the blur of wrought iron railings and shuttered bookshops pass by, moving unseen. "I know which corners keep secrets," Iron replied. "And which ones watch." She glanced at him, the flickering lamplight tracing the slope of his jaw. "Did you ever think your life would carry you here beside a woman raised on court etiquette, racing through London with a letter that could unseat a minister?" He didn't look at her. "Not once. But I'd do it again." The coach slowed as they neared Montague Place. Iron signaled the driver, and they pulled to the rear entrance of a modest townhouse with an arched door and a single gas lamp flickering above the threshold. A man in a midnight blue coat waited beside the steps, his hat pulled low. Iron stepped down first. "That's him." Delphina followed, her boots soft against the worn stone. The man straightened as she approached. "You've come from Hathersedge?" he asked. She nodded and offered the sealed letter. "Lady Emmeline said you'd see it safely received." The man accepted it with gloved hands. "The Duke will read it tonight. If what she says is true, he'll act by morning." Delphina's breath caught. "And the testimony?" "I'll arrange the meeting. Quietly. You'll receive word before the end of the week." Iron kept his gaze on the man's face. "What protection will you offer the witness?" "Discretion and a new name, if needed." Delphina hadn't realized she was holding her breath until her shoulders eased. "Thank you." The man tipped his hat. "You've done the difficult part." Once the coach pulled away, they didn't return to the cellar. Iron guided them on foot through the narrow lanes around Russell Square, taking a path that twisted through mews and past shuttered taverns. They reached a small chapel, long disused and half covered in ivy. He produced a key from beneath his vest and opened the side door. Inside, the air smelled of old wood and beeswax. Iron led her into the vestry, where a fire had been built earlier but left to die low. A single cot and a battered desk stood near the wall, and a high stained glass window filtered in the faint light of the moon. "You've slept here?" she asked, her voice softened by the hush of the space. "Sometimes." when I needed quiet. Delphina stepped toward the window. The glass was cracked in one corner, and a figure of St. Dunstan stood in muted reds and golds, holding tongs and casting out devils. She turned toward him. Why St. Dunstan? He was a smith before he became a saint, Iron said, removing his coat. They say he once seized the devil by the nose with hot pincers. She crossed her arms. And how do you know the devil when he comes? He met her eyes. He always comes with a smile and the right papers. She sat on the cot, the wool blanket beneath her still holding the warmth of the fire. When this is over, she said, I'll have the estate back. But it won't feel like it once did. He moved toward the hearth, stirring the embers. Places don't stay the same. No, she said. But maybe they can be made better. He looked over his shoulder. How? With people who aren't afraid of the truth. He stood and crossed to her. And if the crown offers you a quiet settlement? A return to your name in exchange for silence. She shook her head. I won't trade justice for comfort. He crouched beside her, his hand resting briefly on her knee. It may come to that. She touched his wrist, her fingers tracing the edge of a faint scar. Then I'll need someone beside me who remembers what it cost. He didn't respond, but his hand turned beneath hers, fingers curling around hers with quiet finality. In the morning, the city was wrapped in mist. They left the chapel before the bells rang for prime, winding their way to a small house near Holborn, where Ellis waited with the man from the night before. Delphina stayed outside, letting Iron go in alone. When he returned, his face was drawn but steady. He's agreed to speak. The Duke's men will collect him by noon. She nodded. Then we wait. They took shelter in a print shop with a rear room that smelled of ink and damp parchment. Delphina kept her hands busy folding pamphlets beside the owner's daughter, while Iron worked at the bindings. The quiet rhythm of it calmed her, the scrape of bone folders, the soft thud of stacked sheets. Later, over a bowl of lentil stew, she turned to him. When this ends, I'll need someone to manage the smithy on the estate. The one my father built for the tenant villages. You trust me with that? I'd trust you with more than that. He set his spoon down. And if I said I'd only go if you asked me as more than your smith? I'd ask you as the man who gave me back my name, she said. And the man I could build a life beside. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers, not tentative, not uncertain. Just sure. Then ask, he said. She did. And he said yes. The sun broke weakly through the clouds as they stepped back into the street, their path no longer hidden, but clear.